All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Bas Spliet. He is a master's student in history and Arabic studies at the University of Ghent, Belgium, where he researches the anti-nuclear weapons movement in Europe of the early 1980s. That's interesting. He is proficient in Arabic, traveled to Syria in 2018, and lived in Cairo, Egypt in 2019, and aspires to become an investigative journalist after graduation. Well, he sure as hell writes a great piece about Yemen. I can tell you that. We're running this one on antiwar.com today. After another coup in Aden, which government in Yemen is legitimate? Welcome to the show, Bas. How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm a fan of the show, so it's an honor to be on.
Oh, cool. Well, happy to hear that. And it was great to read this piece. I can tell you're really on the story here. So, I guess the context is obviously the conflict over who controls the port city of Aden down there in the south of Yemen. But you also give great context to the whole war. So I guess, first of all, well, go ahead and take us back, as you do, to the fall of the Saleh regime and the rise of the Houthis and the Hadi government, because you kind of have to set us up to understand the divisions in the south between the Hadi government and the Southern Transitional Council and so forth. So go ahead and rewind and start wherever you think people need to hear.
Yes, you touch up on important points, and that it is a complex conflict, but it's not that difficult to unwind. So let's try to do that. I will just from the start say that I have listened to your conversations with Mansour Hadi, and so you know where I got the original idea of writing this article from. But I think what happened very recently, the coup in Aden, really provides a window into that larger picture, which we can spell out. And that is, basically what happened very recently was, I think right now it's a little over a week ago, the Southern Transitional Council, which are separatists that are funded and supported by the United Arab Emirates, they did a coup in the port city of Aden, as you mentioned. But it should be noted that this is not an isolated instance. For about the last 2 years, they have put to the test the unity of the Saudi-led coalition, as it is called, by sometimes taking over government institutions. And this has culminated, especially last summer. There was heavy fighting between UAE-supported forces and Saudi-led forces. There was an agreement, a Riyadh agreement, but now this has somewhat been terminated because of the latest coup. And there is some, they have settled things for now, but basically, though there's not much reporting about it, it looks like the Southern Transitional Council still supports Aden. And this is very ironic because Aden, although it is not the capital, Sana'a is, it is an important city which is supposed to serve as a temporary capital of the governments of Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi, who, and now we're about to wind back, who had been the vice president of Yemen for 18 years, ever since 1994, if I'm not mistaken. But when his president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was deposed in the Arab Spring, basically the Gulf countries, they came together and they brokered a transition deal that puts the former vice president, Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi, in power and made him the new president. And it's true, like a couple of months later, in the beginning of 2012, there was an election. I'm not sure if you can call it that, because there was only one candidate on the ballot box. And if you go back at reports, you see the picture. The ballot is basically a picture of Hadi and a circle where you're supposed to mark a vink, a yes note. But only by explicitly writing no there could you vote no. So it's not really a democratic election. But, and this is very important, American Secretary of State back then, Hillary Clinton, said that, quote, it was an important step in Yemen's brighter democratic future. And Victoria Newlett, another State Department official, elaborated on that and said there will be free and fair elections very soon. But basically that sham election gave Hadi a temporary, an international mandate for, in 2 years' time, engage in a transition towards democracy, and after 2 years there should be free elections. That obviously did not happen, and he became the new dictator. And as a result of that, because he was not, there was no evidence that he was moving towards democracy. This is the reason why the Houthis in January 2015, they stormed the capital, Sana'a. They kicked out Hadi. Hadi fled to the south to Aden, and a couple of months later, in March, he fled to Saudi Arabia. And once in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who was then the defense minister, later became the crown prince, as we all know. He set up a coalition of 10 Sunni Arab countries that would vow to reinstall Hadi in his rightful place, because after all, he was the legitimate ruler of the country, as in their discourse at any rate. And ever since then, there's been a relentless, despicable war, as again we all know, waged by that Saudi-led coalition on the people of Yemen against the Houthi forces. But even though they have installed a blockade, they have waged a relentless bombing campaign and all sorts of other stuff, the Houthis, after 5 years of war, they still control the capital. 5 years, and they didn't even come close to losing that control of the capital. At the same time, that President Hadi, he resides most of the time in Saudi Arabia. He isn't even in Yemen most of the time, and even then, he has basically no control of the situation on the ground in Yemen, because you have the Southern Transitional Council, the UAE-backed separatists. You have forces in his pay, but you also have Al-Qaeda and ISIS running around. So you have all sorts of people in the south that vie for power. At the same time, in the north, there has been a relatively stable situation. Of course, there's been much fighting, but the Houthis have retained control for the capital, and more importantly, control over 70 to 80% of the population for 5 years. Yet, contrary to Hadi, who is in Saudi Arabia, the Houthis are still called rebels. And this is where, I think they're and this now will make my point. If you in university, we can of course debate about that, whether we agree or not, but the basic definition of what is a state, according to Max Weber, and this is a German sociologist of the 19th century, who is revered today. The basic definition of a functioning state, if you can control a monopoly of violence. And I think it's clear that the Houthis have done that for the last five years, at least under over a vast amount of the population, the majority of the population, whereas Hadi, the supposedly internationally recognized and legitimate ruler of Yemen has not. So I think we should change that, and this could be if we recognize that and start calling the Houthis a government and recognize that Hadi is not in control of the situation on the ground, we can start to move towards an end of this conflict.
Yeah, it seems kind of ridiculous. I even know a reporter who's really good on this stuff, who I argued with back and forth about this, who said, yeah, but the Houthis were never elected to anything. I said, yeah, but neither was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Neither was Abdullah Saleh, who America backed for 30 years there. And truly, neither was Hadi. I mean, you call that an election? Of course not. And we're agreed about that. But for some reason, and honestly, in all of my research about this, I don't know of anything good to say about the Houthis. It's not a matter of like sticking up for their side of the fight or anything like that. It's just that, in fact, they seized the capital city 5 years ago, 5.5 almost, and no one's been able to take it from them since then. And they took over all the government departments and are trying to administer it. They're ruling over the supermajority of the population of the country, as you said. And what it really is a test of the public relations capabilities of the Western governments, right? That can we make people continue to call this government the rebels and call the people who have been nowhere near actual power for 5.5 years the legitimate government of the country, even after it's been clear really this whole time that Hadi will never be the president of Yemen again. There's zero chance that he will be reinstalled in power there, no matter what happens. And yet still he's legitimate because he's recognized, his government is recognized by Saudi and America, especially, is all.
Yeah, we don't have to look at alternative media to make that claim that like Hadi will never become the real president anymore. I think even before this coup, like the Sana Center for Strategic Studies, I think they're called, which is more or less an independent think tank as far as I can tell. They're not basically pro-Western, pro-Saudi, and nor are they pro-Houthi totally. They had contracted 5 scholars with an expert knowledge of the conflicts and Yemen in general, and they all said like, this guy is not really in power. They even his successor, if it would be the same posture, will definitely not will not have the same. It will be the same. Like there needs to be some real change before Yemenis will generally recognize another ruler. Just basically, they don't want Saudi and Western imperialism anymore.
Yeah. And, the Houthis might be from the north, but they're Yemenis. It's not like they're foreign invaders. And as Nasser Arabi put it to me on the show years ago now, is how long this thing has been going on, that, essentially, well, so they're in charge of the government now. It's no different than a Texan being elected to the White House and then replaced by a Californian or whatever in our country, that, we're all Houthis now, as long as they're in power and they're being bombed by a foreign country. So the population doesn't have to convert to Zaidi Shi'ism to feel like they are being represented by this faction that is in charge of their government now.
I think, Scott, that is a very good point, and it touched upon a very large issue that is prevalent in basically all conflicts in the Middle East, right? I don't know the percentage, but like the majority of the country is Sunni, yet indeed the Shias, like it's not the Shias that they are in power. Like it happens to be now Shiism that provides the answer to foreign meddling. So it's enhances the popularity of the Houthis because they have like even the Brookings Institute or something will recognize that the Houthis have like they fight like one of their main political points is fighting corruption and fighting foreign meddling, and this makes them popular, right? And if you look at other conflicts, like based upon like the political philosophy of Bernard Lewis and Samuel Huntington, and the Clash of Civilizations, like um, uh, neoconservative pundits, but also liberal commentators. Basically, they will always say that they will always try to extrapolate like the sectarian foundations of conflicts in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, wherever else. But if you look at the conflict, like not totally, but like for the most part, Shias and Sunnis and Druze and Ismailis and Sunnis and Kurdish, they definitely have their problems, and there is armed conflict and there is conflict. Nobody's denying that, but like the culminating of that conflict into major wars never happens absent foreign intervention. And I think this shows that that is not religion but politics that underlies most of these conflicts.
Right.
And I think an interesting comparison could be my country, because I live in Belgium. I guess not a lot of people in your audience know details about Belgian politics. Neither do I, basically, because I'm not interested in it. It's too complex. But more or less half of people in Flanders, which is the upper part that speaks Dutch like me, they want independence for Flanders, for half of the country, for the people that speak Dutch from the whole country, which is in part Dutch, in part French speaking. And this has been an issue for so many years, for decades, and like gradually but surely there is more and more independence for the north. But there is no armed conflict here. And I think the difference between Belgium and Yemen is that foreign meddling. We are, if Belgium, for instance, would have been in the position and in the economic and geopolitical position that Yemen is, if it would be in a third world place, and there would be interests, powerful interests that want to support Flanders and powerful interests that would support Wallonia and Belgium, it might erupt into a civil war. But if people are left to themselves, and I think that is also true for Yemen, like if there wouldn't be colonialism, if there wouldn't be post-colonialism, if there wouldn't be imperialism, if there wouldn't have been all of this, because basically since the 1960s there has been some sort of proxy wars dividing the Yemeni people. There still would be religious difference, there still would be political difference, but it wouldn't necessarily descend into the chaos that we see today. And I think that is a large point that is true for the whole Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Hey man, you guys are going to love No Dev, No Ops, No IT by Hussein Badakhshani. It's a fun and interesting read all about how to run your high-tech company like a good libertarian should. Forget all the junk. Read No Dev, No Ops, No IT by Hussein Badakhshani. Find it in the margin at scotthorton.org. Hey, y'all, here's the thing. Donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show, and you can get a QR code commodity disc as my gift to you. It's a 1-ounce silver disc with a QR code on the back. You take a picture of it with your phone, and it gives you the instant spot price and lets you know what that ounce of silver is worth on the market in Federal Reserve notes in real time. It's the future of currency in the past too. CommodityDiscs.com, or just go to scotthorton.org/donate. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for ExpandDesigns.com. Harley Abbott and his crew do an outstanding job designing, building, and maintaining my sites, and they'll do great work for you. You need a new website? Go to ExpandDesigns.com/Scott and save $500. Back to the Southern Transitional Council here. I never could find this again, but there was this footage of a guy on horseback with his AK-47 going, "Viva Hugo Chavez!" And I just thought it was funny because, so much of the discussion of this war is about the fight between the Houthis and the Saudis. And the Saudis, I guess, backing the Al-Islah Muslim Brotherhood faction that they tend to hate everywhere else nowadays, while the UAE is focused on backing Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, but they don't like the Muslim Brotherhood for whatever reason. Al-Qaeda's fine, but the Muslim Brotherhood, no way. And So, and then they have their different proxies and militias and conscripts and mercenaries and whoever on the ground there that they're fighting against the Houthis with in the capital and in the north. But then in the south, the Southern Transitional Council, which I don't know everything about them, but one of their animating principles is socialism, and I guess another is secession. They don't want a deal with the capital city, whoever rules it. They would rather go ahead and split the country back into North and South Yemen. Is that right?
Yeah, and I also have to admit that I don't know all the details. Neither can we, because they're just very limited information. But true, like it should be noted that though, like the movement has resurfaced and has become prominent since 2018. But in fact, it was founded in 2007, before the Civil War, and it harks back indeed to the desire of some people in the South to establish an independent country in the South, which should be independent from the North. And I guess also what should be another ultimate irony is that when that independent country existed between 1967 and 1990, when Yemen was united again, it was basically a Marxist regime, and it was supported by the Soviet Union. And the people who should have been like our erstwhile enemies a couple of decades ago, I guess some of their descendants, I guess there's not a perfect line. There are other ideologies, and people change, and they're like it's another generation. But it is like their sons and daughters, maybe. I'm not sure because I don't have all information. Meanwhile, before 1967, there was a couple of years that there existed a pan-Arab Arab nationalist government in the north, if I'm not, no, in the whole country actually for a couple of years, which was backed by Gamal Abdel Nasser, dictator of Egypt back then. And again, an ultimate irony is that both the Saudis and Israel, and I'm not taking this from alternative media, it is acknowledged by the Brookings Institute again, they supported the fathers and grandfathers of the Houthi, the royalists of the Zaidi faith. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, shocking, but not surprising.
Yeah. Again, it basically goes to show that we don't like people. Again, these neoconservative ideologues will try to whitewash conflicts in the Middle East as going back to religious roots, but they just aren't. It's another issue.
I'm almost certain it was Michael Horton, no relation to me, the Yemen expert, who, actually, I'm not sure about my footnote there. But anyway, I'm sure I could find it if I tried hard. The quote was about the Houthi slogan that you cite in here too, of death to America and all of this stuff, and how I think you had them explain, we don't really mean that. This is just a complaint against foreign intervention, which is understandable enough. But the thing I had read had said that they came up with that slogan back during the Obama years when the U.S. was backing, or was really, waging the CIA drone war there and backing the Saleh government. And then Saleh was using the money and weapons America was giving him as his bribe to let us fight al-Qaeda in order to attack the Houthis. And they made up the slogan then just to embarrass Saleh, because everybody knew that he was working so closely with the Americans. So they were, essentially carving out this position of being very nationalist as opposed to their leader at the time. But that was really just politics. But meanwhile, the Houthis have certainly never attacked or threatened the United States in any way whatsoever. It goes without saying when we talk about this. Yes, America's complicit in this genocide in Yemen for the last 5 years here. But, oh yeah, by the way, they never did anything to us. Or the only ones who ever did were al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and we're fighting on their side in this one, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, that's true. and it should be noted that like this war is emboldening Al Qaeda and ISIS, which are the ones we're supposed to fight, right?
Yep. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have also like cited this in I guess numerous times, but it's true. You can go back to 2015, January 2015, to Al Monitor. Like they pressed like it's a publication pretty mainstream that is focused on the Middle East, and hence the Al in Al Monitor. And they cite State Department. No, it's a Defense Department official. I think his name is Michael Vickers, saying that,
right,
admitting that they have an ongoing intelligence relationship with the Houthis to fight Al Qaeda. And even more interesting, if you read the whole article, he expressed about who these Houthis are, because like back then nobody really knew him, right? And he points to a speech by Hussein is the Abdel Malik Houthi is the leader then, I think, to point out that the Houthis are fighting corruption and fighting foreign meddling. I don't remember the exact quote. So basically saying like it is understandable that they have some support. This is January 2015, and then the Saudi-led coalition was suddenly found, and we start to dance to the tunes of the Saudis, and we start to backtrack on that position, unfortunately. And as a result, the West has supported through its arms sales and limited support has basically legitimized genocidal war on the Yemeni people.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the thing that I mention this in every Yemen interview, and I can't get over it, and nobody should, that there it is in Al Monitor, as you say, the Barbara Slavin article, where she's citing General Michael Vickers, the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence at the time. And then there's the piece in the Wall Street Journal, both of them from January of 2015, saying that Central Command is working closely with the Houthis, passing them intelligence to use against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And it's just 2 months later, in March of 2015, that Barack Obama stabs them in the back and takes al-Qaeda's side against them.
Yeah, like, and people might scorn at the idea that, like, whoa, are we in bed with al-Qaeda? But I don't know, if you have seen, like, a recent article on Minsk Press News a couple of days ago by another Yemeni journalist based in Sana'a. I think his name is Ahmed Abdul Karim or something. And he went with the Houthi fighters to a region in the desert that was taken over by the Houthis in the last couple of days. And they found Al-Qaeda flags and ISIS documents and all sorts of stuff that implicates that there was deep involvement of Al-Qaeda. But if you go look at the map, there were like very small villages, but he cites the region in which it is. And if you go look at the map, these are hundreds of miles, I don't know the exact distance, hundreds of miles away from supposedly the Al-Qaeda and ISIS pockets. These are supposed to be under the control of the Hadi government. So I guess there is indeed like mounting evidence that there is very significant overlap between that whole Saudi-led UAE-backed coalition and what are supposed to be our enemies.
Yeah. Well, it's really just incredible. I mean, when you look at the danger that was coming out of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula before, when, they had done the Charlie Hebdo attack and tried to blow up a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. There was the failed printer cartridge bomb plot to blow up a plane, I'm not sure, over the U.S. or over Europe there. And, of course, I'm pretty sure it was Hani Hanjour, one of the September 11th hijackers from the San Diego cell, the Flight 77 hijackers. His father-in-law ran the switchboard house there, where they helped to coordinate the September 11th attack. And so these are real-ass al-Qaeda guys who have a history of attacking and attempting to attack the United States. And America's intervention on their side here, and our allies' intervention on their side here, has increased their power by whatever hundreds or thousands of percentage points. And when this part of the war winds down, we're going to be left with that. the all new and improved Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula with years of battlefield experience and all the weapons they could steal from the various military bases they've sacked, and God knows what this whole time that they've, been able to improve their capabilities with America's help.
Indeed, and we don't have to, as this shows, we don't have to support the war on terror. Not the segment that is abroad, like in the wars in the Middle East, to see that, because it is exactly this war on terror supposedly that morphs into some sort of war of terror, wherein like instability that the West is complicit in creating makes Al-Qaeda, emboldens Al-Qaeda, and this is true in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, and all sorts of other places. I guess the larger point is just the philosophy that we share is just non-interventionism. If we do not engage militarily or support other governments in aggressive foreign policies and wars in the Middle East, then it's difficult to pronounce his name, but the guy who is now at the Quincy Institute, Tirta Parsi or something, has wrote recently in foreign policy. The Middle East is safer if the United States just stays away, and also the threat of terrorism will decrease. Yeah,
well, no doubt about it, and we sure do keep switching sides back and forth there, depending on the battlefield. Certainly the American people thought that the writ was, if they're going to support the war on terrorism at all, it would be the war against bin Ladenite groups, not the war against secular allies of Iran, like for the war in Syria, for example, or these religious friends of Iran, probably not even really allies of Iran, like we have here in Yemen, and in both cases, directly on the side of the bin Ladenites against them. It's not like just supporting Saddam Hussein's secular tyranny against Iran and their Shiite friends, but it's supporting bin Ladenites against them, which is treason, which is, Iran might be our government's adversary in the region, but the bin Ladenites are the actual enemies of American civilians whose blood they've shed, by the thousands. So it's just an absolutely unforgivable policy. And the only reason they get away with it is because they don't ever have to explain it, because nobody's ever asking. And so it all just kind of flies under the radar. If they talk about it all, it's the Saudi-led coalition. What does that have to do with us at all anyway? But so let me ask you this to wrap up then. If I had my way and somehow I could make the Saudis come to terms with the Houthi regime and just back off, and the UAE and the U.S. too, and go ahead and withdraw their forces and stop the bombing and come to some kind of peace, do you think that, obviously the Houthi regime in the capital is going to last, but do you think that they would be able to form some kind of coalition government with the Southern Transitional Council down there in Aden? Obviously Hadi is virtually, him and his faction are going to be almost non-issue without the foreigners there to back them. But I wonder if you think that this will be the end of Yemen and it's going to split back apart like it was in the 90s.
I'm going to go ahead and admit that I'm not sure about that, because I'm not that much of an expert, but we don't have a glass ball, and we don't have to, because it could split. There could be a settlement in which there is a power sharing agreement, or it could split. But basically, to put it very frank, who cares? Let them see for themselves and see how it's going to evolve. Just how it should be done is not through violence. And I think if the foreign intervention goes away, it would be preposterous to say that all the violence will go away, but it will definitely diminish, and we can let the Yemenis see for themselves. And I think, just as I guess I'll throw this into it real quick. When I came back from Syria, and I had my criticism of the moderate rebels and all of that, there were some people, including Syrian refugees, that criticized me for saying like, yeah, but you are not the one that should say who Syrians should support and who not. And I think that was a very valid criticism. It is true. It is not up to us to see how the situation, who should be in control of Yemen, and we just should go ahead and let Yemenis see for themselves. The only thing that is important is that it should be recognized, and people in the West should realize that our support to the Saudi-led coalition is the reason that there is war. As long as we show that there's international opposition, which has been happening in the last 2 years, the Saudis and the Emiratis are going to start to retreat. The more we do that through stopping arms sales, starting diplomatic relationships with the Houthi government, just showing disgust, like the bills that have been passed in the American Congress and Senate, mm-hmm. the more, the faster basically this war will be over, as even the New York Times has acknowledged.
Yep. And just goes to show, too, that Donald Trump, just like Barack Obama before him, he could turn this thing off with just a spoken word. He doesn't even need to lift a pen. Just say out loud to the chief of staff, let the defense secretary know, to let the Saudis know that we're done. That's all it would take.
Instead, he vetoed the bill passed, I think, by both Congress and Senate, I think last year, to stop the war. Unfortunately, it's not an anti-imperialist president, as some would have it believe, as Yemen and Iran shows.
Yep. All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate this article. I hope everyone will go and read this thing. It's really great. It's a good one to pass around and show to people who aren't familiar with this war. It's got a great history of how we got to where we are now and the rest of it. It's at antiwar.com right now. After another coup in Aden, which government in Yemen is legitimate? By Bas Spliet. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.